Summary of Howard's End by E.m Forster. Margaret Schlegel reads a number of letters from her sister Helen, who is staying with the Wilcox family at their old farmhouse, Howard's End. Helen writes that she has fallen in love with Paul Wilcox, even though their families are very different. The Schlegels are liberal thinkers, while the Wilcoxes are usually materialistic, closed-minded, and unprogressive. Julie Munt, Margaret's aunt, hears that Helen is in love with Paul, so she chooses to go to the Wilcox house and meet them. After she leaves, Helen sends Margaret a letter to tell her that the crush is over. Julie messes up her first meeting with the Wilcox family, which makes Helen very embarrassed. Ruth Wilcox steps in and calmly fixes the problem. With Julie and their cousin Frida Mosbach, the Schlegels go to the symphony. Helen leaves early and accidentally takes Leonard Basts' umbrella. Leonard is poor and couldn't afford to buy a new one. Margaret asks Leonard to come home with her after the symphony to get his umbrella from their house. He wishes he knew as much about art and culture as she did, but he only has so much free time. Margaret and Helen feel sorry for his situation. Leonard turns down tea with the Schlegels and goes back to his small room in the basement, where he lives with Jackie, a down-and-out woman he promised to help and marry. After Charles and Dolly Wilcox got married, the Schlegels found out that the Wilcoxes had moved to London. Even though they are different ages and have different ideas about life, Margaret and Ruth slowly become friends. Ruth dies out of the blue and leaves a note to Margaret that says she wants Howard's End. Henry, Ruth's husband, and their kids don't care about her note and don't tell Margaret anything about her fortune. After 2 years, the Schlegels have to look for a new home in London. Leonard comes back into their lives when he walks all night on a whim and Jackie calls the Schlegels to help find him. Margaret and Helen are pleased by Leonard's trip into nature and wish they could do more to help him. When they see Henry Wilcox again, he tells them that Leonard's insurance company might go out of business. The Schlegels call Leonard to their house to tell him the news and encourage him to find a new job before he loses his current one. Leonard is ashamed that they care about him, so he acts badly, but in the end, he does what they say. Henry says that he will help Margaret find a new place to live. As they spend more time together, they fall in love and get engaged. Helen is against the marriage because she doesn't think it's a good match. Henry's son Charles is also against it because he thinks Margaret is trying to get Howard's End. When Henry takes Margaret to Howard's End for the first time, she likes how simple it is and how close it is to nature. Henry, on the other hand, thinks the house is too small and doesn't plan to move back. He gets a country house in Oniton, which is far west of London. His daughter Evie will soon be getting married there. Margaret goes to Oniton with the wedding party, and she doesn't like how the group treats her now that she's Henry's fiancée. They expect her to act in a very traditional way. Evie's wedding goes off without a hitch until Helen shows up with Leonard and Jackie to talk to Henry about the bad advice he gave Leonard that made him quit his job for nothing. Margaret is mad that her sister crashed the wedding, but she agrees to ask Henry for a job for Leonard in his business. Henry, on the other hand, knows Jackie as his ex-lover and won't help the Basts. In shock, Margaret tells Helen that she can't help the Basts and that she should forget about it. Helen is sad, so she sleeps at the hotel with Leonard. Later, she goes to Oxford to see her brother Tibby. She asks him to give money to the Basts on her behalf. She goes to America to get away from her sister. Margaret marries Henry, and when her sister doesn't come back to England after many months, she starts to worry. She tells Henry about her worries, and he comes up with a plan to get Helen to Howard's End, where Ruth's old friend Miss Avery has moved all of the Schlegels' things. Margaret finds out that Helen has been hiding the fact that she is pregnant with Leonard's child when she talks to her sister at Howard's End. Helen wants to take the baby back to Germany and raise it there. She spends one last night with Margaret in Howard's End, which makes Henry very unhappy. Helen's unwed pregnancy shocks the Wilcoxes, but Henry refuses to see the double standard in the way he explains his own affair but condemns Helen's. The next morning, Charles shows up at Howard's End to talk to Helen. Leonard shows up, too, to say sorry to Margaret for how he treated Helen. Charles strikes Leonard right away to get back at his family for the scandal, and Leonard dies from a heart attack. So, Charles is found guilty of manslaughter and given a 3-year jail term. Henry is devastated by what happened to his son, so Margaret steps in to put the family back together. Henry, Margaret, Helen, and Helen's baby move into Howard's End. Ruth has always wanted Henry to give Margaret Howard's End, and he finally does. Margaret plans to leave the house to her nephew when she dies. His kid will inherit Howard's End after Leonard's death.
About the author. E.m Forster was born in London to a family from the middle class. As a child, he got a lot of money from his great-aunt. This gave him enough money to live on and let him focus on writing. Forster went to King's College at Cambridge and later joined the Bloomsbury Group, a group of thinkers and writers that included Virginia Woolf and Lytton Strachey. After college, he went to Egypt, Germany, and India. During World War I, he refused to fight because of his beliefs. At the beginning of the 1920s, he went back to India and worked as the private servant of Tukhojarao III, the Maharaja of Duas. Forster's most popular book was A Passage to India, but A Room with a View and Howard's End are also well-known books by him. He also became a famous radio host for BBC Radio and wrote important books about literature. Forster was gay, but only his closest friends knew this. He never got married. He died at age 91 from a stroke.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.